Well, thank you for coming out this morning. Thanks to P2P for inviting me to have this opportunity to speak. Essentially, I have just one message, which is that it's important for us to consider the role of myth-busting and framing the narrative of what we have to offer in this region. And I would say that it's something not only for us to think about in this region, but something for small communities across Canada to think about as they think about how do they attract and retain people. So as Jerry was alluding to when she spoke, when you think about a small or a secondary region, Marinenshi and Calgary often says, pay more attention to Calgary. We're bigger than New Brunswick. We're bigger than Nova Scotia. Let's not even talk about PEI. Sorry, Craig. So the scale of things is very interesting as people talk about immigration. And so I would say that myth-busting applies to all the scales that we face in Atlantic Canada, and it's something that we really need to do. So I'm going to focus on Atlantic Canada. As I began thinking about this, I thought, why isn't Vicky S. doing this presentation? Because Vicky has, I think, 17 categories or 17 factors that she talks about in terms of attracting and retaining immigrants. And I thought to myself, geez, it's already being done. What can I offer? And I thought, well, number 18 is myth busting. So let me illustrate what I'm talking about to some extent. As has already been said, there's the Atlantic population growth strategy that's going to impact this region significantly in the next few years. The first part of that strategy is the pilot on immigration, which I think has sparked the imagination of a lot of people. But as we go into that, I think that it's important to myth bust around two areas. The first is how we think about our communities and how we pitch what our communities think and do. And the second is to be far more creative about our policy, far more creative about how we think about attracting and retaining people and thinking about who we want to attract and retain. All right, let me bust a few myths. I only have 5 to bust. First myth to bust, Atlantic Canadians don't want newcomers, right? Outside of Atlantic Canada, people in Atlantic Canada already know this, but outside of Atlantic Canada, I don't think people know this. So this is polling, it's not the most recent polling, it's the second most recent polling. It comes from a poll that was done in late August by Nanos for the Globe and Mail. On the bigger circle, you look at the overall attitudes in Canada. On the breakout over here, they focus on the negative. And in the last month or two, there's been a lot of focus on whether Canadians are, the honeymoon is over with immigration and refugees in Canada. And it's a story that really needs to be busted because it's actually not true. Like when you look at these numbers, the majority of Canadians are not saying fewer people. So this is actually focusing on the negative of people the percentage of people that say they want fewer immigrants or fewer newcomers. Atlantic Canada, 29% compared to the prairies, which is almost 50%, compared to Quebec, which is almost 50%, compared to Ontario, which is over 30%. If they don't want immigrants, come here. We'll take you. In fact, Atlantic Canada is the exception within Canada right now. So if Canada's exception in the world, where the world is becoming skeptical about migration and refugees, and we're seeing immigration and refugees as a solution to our problems rather than a problem in itself, the same thing is happening in Canada. All right, let's bust it again. Same myth. Refugees, support for refugees. This is from IRCC statistics and from their tracking data. Atlantic Canada, 60% of Atlantic Canadians supported bringing in Syrian refugees. You compare that to the other regions, and the only other region that's kind of getting close is BC, maybe Quebec. People here really embrace the idea of bringing newcomers. All right, let's take it to temporary foreign workers, something that's a little bit more controversial in the last few years. If you go there, again, you see that Atlantic Canada is a bit of an exception. It's certainly a region that is supportive of temporary foreign workers, especially when you compare to rates in other regions. It's about the same or better than other regions in Canada. So myth busted number 1, yeah, we want immigrants and we want newcomers. in all their shapes and forms. And I would say that if you look at the polling that came out this week in Angus Reid, that's gotten a lot of attention in the CBC, I actually looked at the full report. I went into that. Again, Atlantic Canadians were the exception, more tolerant, more open, more wanting newcomers. So it's really important that we get this message out to the rest of Canada, to the rest of the world, because that's the first seed in attracting newcomers. Well, the second seed is that we're not ready for newcomers, right? People say, oh, we don't have the services, we're not supportive, we don't have the policies. That's not true either. And here I'm going to plug a lot of things from iSense because I work with iSense a lot, but it could be any service provider organization in Atlantic Canada. We're very innovative in this region. In fact, maybe 20 years ago, people would have looked to Manitoba for innovation on how to attract and retain immigrants. Now I think the true innovation is happening in this region. And I'm going to highlight a few projects here that show impact across different areas. One of my favorite things, and I think I have a few of them, I love giving away these USB cards that iSense created that has stories of refugees and newcomers so that people get an understanding. It's getting the story out to the community. SOPA, which is a program that's gone national, it's about giving consultation to people about job prospects and what might be needed, prepping people for their CVs, working with the business community. The business community also sees immigration as an important element. You might be wondering, why do I have Theodore Tugboat? Well, politicians also are quite open to immigration in this region. And the mayor of Halifax, there's an election going on right now in Halifax. He launched his campaign on Theodore Tugboat as a welcome ambassador that's actually has links to iSense as well through a welcome ambassador program that is about welcoming newcomers to the city and the region. So I would, and I can go on, but I don't want to take all morning, although Jerry says I can. But, the point I want to get across is politicians, communities, individuals, service providers, we're ready. And we need to get that message out. In fact, if you look at the Syrian refugees, we were the first region to get people out of temporary housing. We had too many people wanting to sponsor families. So, the problem actually became, hey, we want our refugees, which is a whole other issue to talk about. All right, so if these are two myths, a third myth I think that we need to bust is a policy myth. Who do we want to attract? And I really get annoyed here. I get annoyed that all the discussion is about what I call high-flyer STEM workers. And actually, my colleague Alexandra Dobrowski is the one who calls these high flyers, and she convinced me. We did a report a couple of years ago about thinking creatively about policy. These are stats that were done by Monica Van Husty and Jean Benoit, and they look at retention rates for the Canadian provinces. In the kind of pink, you have PhDs. In mauve, you have MAs. In green, you have BAs. In blue, with my circles around them, you have people with skilled trades. In fact, people with skilled trades have higher rates of retention in the 4 Atlantic provinces, which I circled over there, than those who have MAs and BAs, who are part of the pool of people that we want to attract, part of the pool of people who are those STEM workers. The PhDs, I would warn you, is a little bit misleading. 100% of PhDs staying in Newfoundland and Labrador. I hate to break it to you, I don't buy that for a second. I think it's because of small numbers, and I think it's largely because of doctors and university professors. Maybe it's because of Tony. Okay. Well, busting myths in policy again. The fourth myth I want to bust is we want young people. Yeah, sure we want young people, but who stays? In fact, what I would say is important in thinking about our policy in this region is rather than just thinking about who's going to work, we need to think about who's going to stay. Because what we need more than workers is people, because people are workers. When you look at who stays, middle-aged people. Not sexy in policy world. Hey, let's go after the middle-aged people. But middle-aged people work. In fact, you get people in their 40s, you've got about 30 years of work ahead of them. More than that, they're less mobile, they have children, they're going to be a bigger net gain in terms of population growth. What's wrong with the young people? Well, they're mobile. Look at the young people around you in your communities. They're leaving. Why would you expect immigrant young people to be any different? All right, last myth to bust. Economic immigrants is the only viable option. Here again, we're looking at retention rates. On the right-hand side, you have skilled workers. On the left-hand side, you have family migrants. And again, you'll notice on the left-hand side, in the Atlantic region, less than, and I can't read with my new bifocals, less than 70% are staying versus on the family side, almost 85% staying. And so I'm not saying stop getting skilled workers. That would be insane. But what I am saying is, hey, there aren't a lot of pathways for family migrants. There's a place where we can actually create different policy. I know that the federal government does push us into skilled workers, but we need to think creatively, because when you have your family with you, you're less likely to leave. You have less draw outside of your community. Likewise, you can't assume that your spouse isn't going to work. That's just poor policy. And in fact, when Yoko Yoshida presents later in the afternoon or later in the morning, I'm not sure when she presents, she's going to show you some statistics that backs that up. All right, let me close with this. Now that the myths are busted, so what? Well, I think it's important for us to embrace the positive values that are expressed by Atlantic Canadians. It's about us saying, yeah, this is something to be proud about. It's something to tell the world. The second thing, celebrate the successes and what works. By no means should we ignore the things that don't work. We do that as a region quite a bit. I often tell people, they say, what's up with Atlantic Canada? I say, we've been in a funk for 100 years. There are some good things. And it's about trying to focus on some of those things, because that's part of the story that gets people to come and gets people to feel like they want to stay. The other thing to do, promote innovative and creative policy. Think about not just the obvious categories. If we think that we're trying to compete against other provinces, other regions, other countries, we have to be nimble, we have to be quick, we have to be doing things differently so that we get the right mix of people who actually want to come and stay. In order to do that, we need to collect information. And so I put a very big plug that all of the Atlantic provinces and all of the researchers in Atlantic Canada, we have an onus to work at collecting information, because we are very poorly served by Stats Canada. Whenever there's a consultation, I ask you one giant favor. Whenever Stats Canada comes knocking and there's a consultation, say, oversample Atlantic Canada. Because in so many data sets, we're undersampled and you can't do the meaningful analysis that's needed to make sound policy. Likewise, for researchers, if it's not already created, don't be afraid, go and create it yourself. And for service provider organizations, you can work with researchers to help amass your data, because you have a wealth of information that can be used to make better policy. So it's important to collect the information. The last thing that I would say is accept the obstacles and the challenges, but bust some myths while you're doing it. So thank you.